His wife left him for a wealthy man, not knowing he was richer than she thought. Please stay with me as I tell my story, and do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking our videos, and sharing with your loved ones. Now, back to the story. David Mitchell sat at the kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee from a chipped mug. His wife Sarah paced behind him, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum floor like a countdown to disaster. "Look at you," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "Same old shirt, same old routine. Do you ever wonder why we never go anywhere? Why we never have anything nice?" David glanced up from his newspaper, the same paper he'd read every morning for 8 years of marriage. "We have everything we need, Sarah. We have each other." She laughed bitterly. "Each other? What's that worth when you drive a 15-year-old Honda and shop at thrift stores? My friends are embarrassed for me, David. They pity me. Your friends don't define our happiness." "Happiness?" Sarah slammed her purse on the counter. "I met someone yesterday. Someone who actually has ambition. Someone who drives a BMW and wears watches that cost more than our monthly rent." David's coffee grew cold in his hands. He'd felt this moment coming for months, the way she'd started dressing differently, staying out late, her eyes always scanning for something better. "His name is Marcus," she continued, pulling out her phone to show him pictures. "Look at this car. Look at this restaurant he took me to. This is what a real man provides." David studied the photos. The flashy car, the expensive suit, the gold chains catching restaurant lights. Everything screamed desperation to be noticed. "Sarah, things aren't always what they seem. Stop." She held up her hand. "I'm done with your excuses. I'm done with this, poverty. I deserve better than a man who clips coupons and drives a car older than some of our neighbors' kids." She pulled out divorce papers from her purse, sliding them across the table. "I already filed. Marcus has connections, his lawyer friend helped me. You'll probably need a public defender." David's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the papers, but his voice remained steady. "If this is what you want, I won't fight it." "Good. Because Marcus said he'd crush you in court anyway. He knows judges, David. Important people. Not like you, hiding behind your little desk at that nobody company." As she gathered her things, Sarah turned back one last time. "You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought you had potential once. But you're just, ordinary. Small. And I'm meant for bigger things." The door slammed behind her, leaving David alone with his cold coffee and a silence that felt both devastating and somehow, peaceful. The next morning, David drove his old Honda to the same office building he'd visited for 5 years. But instead of taking the elevator to the 3rd floor, he pressed the button. For the penthouse. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," his assistant Rebecca greeted him. "The board meeting moved to 10, and the Singapore acquisition needs your final approval." David nodded, settling behind his mahogany desk that overlooked the city skyline. His corner office was modest by billionaire standards, no gold fixtures or ostentatious displays. Just clean lines, family photos, and a view that stretched for miles. His phone buzzed with notifications. A $50 million property development in Miami needed his signature, his charitable foundation required approval for a new children's hospital wing, and his investment firm wanted to discuss acquiring a tech startup. But first, he opened his laptop and transferred his usual anonymous donation to the local homeless shelter, the same amount Sarah had complained about him spending on groceries. "Rebecca," he called through the intercom, "please send flowers to my mother. It's her birthday." "Of course, sir. The usual arrangement?" "Yes. And Rebecca, could you have legal review this?" He held up the divorce papers. "I want to make sure everything's fair." His lawyer called an hour later. "David, you could contest this. She's asking for half of everything, but she has no idea what everything actually means. She listed your assets as a 15-year-old car and whatever's in your checking account. David almost smiled. Sarah had been so focused on appearances, she'd never asked the right questions. She knew he worked in finance, but never inquired further. She saw the modest lifestyle and assumed modest means. Let her have what she's asking for, David said. The checking account has about 30,000. The car's worth maybe 5. She can have half. But David, your actual net worth is. I know what it is. Just, let her go. That evening, David's brother Michael called. Sarah's been telling everyone you're broke. She's actually bragging about leaving you for some guy with money. David stood on his penthouse balcony, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Sarah was probably at an expensive restaurant, believing she'd won the lottery. Let her believe what she needs to believe, Mike. But why? Why let her humiliate you when you could? Because real wealth isn't about proving anything to people who've already decided what you're worth. 3 months later, Sarah stared at the overdue notice in her manicured hands. Marcus had moved her into his penthouse apartment, which she was now realizing was just a fancy rental with payments he could barely afford. Baby, don't worry about those bills, Marcus said, adjusting his fake Rolex. I've got deals closing soon. Big deals. But Sarah had started noticing things. The BMW was a lease he struggled to pay. The expensive dinners were always business meetings he wrote off on taxes for his barely profitable consulting company. The designer clothes came from outlet stores, tags carefully removed. Marcus, I need to ask you something, she said one evening as he paced their living room, phone pressed to his ear, desperately trying to secure another loan. He held up a finger. Yeah, Mike, I know it's the third extension, but the money's coming. No, I can't put up more collateral. Sarah's heart sank. She'd left her marriage for this? For a man who was apparently more broke than she'd thought David was? Her phone rang. It was her friend Jessica. Sarah. Girl, you need to see this. I'm at the Fairmont for this charity gala, and you'll never guess who I just saw. Sarah's blood went cold. Who? Your ex-husband. David. He's literally sitting at the head table. They just announced him as the evening's biggest donor. Sarah, they said he donated $5 million. $5 million. What kind of job did you think he had? The phone slipped from Sarah's hands. Sarah stood outside the Fairmont Hotel, her hands shaking as she tried to process Jessica's words. $5 million. David? The man who used to argue with her about buying name-brand cereal. She pushed through the revolving doors, her heart pounding. The charity gala was in full swing, women in $1,000 gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, the kind of event she'd always dreamed of attending. And there, at the front of the room, stood David. But this wasn't the David she remembered. This man commanded attention without asking for it. He spoke with quiet authority as a room full of some of the city's most powerful people hung on his every word. The Mitchell Foundation has always believed that true success is measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we give back, he was saying. Tonight's donation of $5 million to expand the Children's Medical Center is just the beginning. The room erupted in applause. Sarah watched, stunned, as people lined up to shake his hand, city councilmen, judges, CEOs of companies she recognized from billboards. David Mitchell is a class act, she heard someone say behind her. Built his fortune quietly, never flashy about it. His family's been investing in this city for decades. I heard he personally funded 3 schools last year, another voice added. And that homeless shelter downtown? That's his money keeping it running. Sarah felt dizzy. The homeless shelter where she'd once complained about David volunteering? The schools she'd driven past without a second thought. Excuse me, she heard a familiar voice. She turned to see David's brother Michael. Sarah? What are you doing here? Heat flooded her cheeks. I had no idea. Michael's expression was a mixture of pity and disappointment. No idea about what? That my brother is worth more than everyone in this room combined. That he's been quietly running a multi-billion-dollar investment empire while you complained about his old car. Multi-billion? Sarah whispered. The car, the clothes, the simple lifestyle. That's just who David is. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Our grandfather taught us that real wealth whispers, it doesn't shout. Sarah looked back at David, now surrounded by admirers and business partners. I need to talk to him. Michael shook his head. Sarah, you made your choice. You didn't leave because you were unhappy. You left because you thought you found something better. There's a difference. As the evening wound down, Sarah waited by the hotel's entrance, gathering courage she wasn't sure she possessed. David emerged from the elevators, looking tired but content, loosening his bow tie. David, she called softly. He turned, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of the man who used to bring her coffee in bed every morning. Sarah. His voice was neutral, polite. The voice he'd use with any acquaintance. I need to explain. There's nothing to explain. He began walking toward the valet stand. You made your choice based on what you saw. I respect that. But I didn't know. He stopped and turned to face her fully. For the first time in months, she had his complete attention. You didn't know because you never asked. In 8 years of marriage, you never once asked about my family, my background, or what I actually did at work. You saw a simple life and assumed it meant a simple man. Tears began to well in her eyes. I made a mistake, David. Marcus, he's not what I thought. I lost everything. David's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. You didn't lose everything, Sarah. You traded everything. There's a difference. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Not flashy, not screaming for attention, but Sarah could tell it cost more than most people's homes. I could give you everything back, she whispered desperately. We could start over. I understand now. David paused with his hand on the car door. Sarah, you left chasing gold, not knowing you were already living with a diamond. But the problem was never about money. You left because you thought I wasn't enough. Money doesn't change that. He got into the car, then rolled down the window one last time. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. But it was never going to be with me, not because I couldn't give it to you, but because you couldn't see it when you had it. The car pulled away, leaving Sarah standing alone under the hotel lights, finally understanding the difference between being rich and being wealthy, between having money and having worth. David drove home to his penthouse, where he'd sleep peacefully for the first time in months, surrounded by the quiet dignity he'd never needed to prove to anyone, least of all to someone who'd already decided he wasn't worth her time. The next morning, he'd wake up and continue his simple routine, coffee from a chipped mug, reading the newspaper, and changing the world one quiet decision at a time. Because real wealth, he'd learned long ago, doesn't need an audience.